This is the Forward Movement Podcast. I'm Renee Jean Lemieux, and I am here with one of my favorite humans in the whole world. We have a relation that is unlike probably any other. That's not to talk about here, but maybe a different conversation. This woman I met many, many, many moons ago, and she holds a depth of wisdom within her that flows out in a way that is so obtainable. It's poetry and motion in union with this really playful side as well. I'm so, so deeply honored to introduce you to Janae Dixon. Janae, may you introduce yourself, share anything on your heart, and let's begin.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Renee. I could say the same, all of the same about you. I am really happy to be in this space. I think we're at a critical, pivotal moment in education and education reform. As you said, whatever that means to you, I think there are phases that we have been in and phases that are still to come. And I think we've seen a lot of different waves of what it means to be an educator and to work with youth and adults the same because it is a continuum always. And so I'm happy to start the conversation.
Excellent. Okie dokes. So, how has the act of forward movement transformed your life?
Um, I think for me, from a very young age, I was a dedicated lifelong learner before I even knew what that meant. I would always be in a setting where there was some sort of education going on. So that meant like after school programs and camps. I was a camp kid until I couldn't be a camp kid anymore. They actually said, like, you actually have to work here now. So being a camp kid and then, working with youth as a teenager, and so I think that continuum of education and being a lifelong learner and helping other learners was something I was exposed to at a very young age. And I didn't even realize what was being instilled in me until I sort of had that epiphany, like, is teaching for me? Is education for me? And that even still took many steps to say yes. And I'm still in the process of redefining what that means always.
Hmm. And as you're in this redefining moment, what is an aspect of your past up until this moment regarding education that has really stuck with you that feels alive?
Yeah, I think having a multifaceted lens within the education world, meaning being a student, right? I think we all can kind of relate to that path in some way or another. And we have those really defining moments that lit us up, or those moments that felt like, absolutely no, that was not okay. And so we all sort of have this collective experience as being students. And then for me personally, I think becoming like a teaching fellow, where it's like you're kind of in the teaching world, but you still get to sort of pull back and be a little bit more introspective and not have all of the sort of like responsibilities that come with teaching and being an admin. And then, making the commitment for myself to say, okay, I'm going to step out of this sort of like fellow teaching world and become a full-fledged educator by taking a teaching position. And after teaching for about 4 years in various grades, I think one thing I learned is that there are these underlying issues that are a red thread in pretty much every classroom I've seen. And it comes around support, um, resources, and engagement in many different facets. So family engagement, peer engagement, administration engagement. And so what is actually happening in your classroom, in your blocks? Because some teachers teach in a silo. And what I mean by that is you could be the only adult you interact with for several hours throughout your day. And the adults outside have a lot of expectations of you and you might not be interfacing with them. And so I think when I saw all of those things, I really knew that my role as an educator was going to take a step outside of the classroom. And so I started exploring the nonprofit world. And what that really exposed me to was the social justice movement around education and lack of education for many students and families who are coming from low income areas and impoverished areas and areas that have lack of resources, including proper nutrition. And so that's a whole nother topic on how nutrition and education go hand in hand. But I think I started to sort of have all of these eye-opening moments as an educator that continues to unfold right now, even in the space of education that I'm in now.
And when we're looking, jumping it back a few breaths of when an educator is the only adult in the classroom for many, many hours and they're in this silo that you speak of, how do you feel or how do you see that that affects the youth ultimately?
I think it affects both parties. I can speak for myself personally. I think it creates an environment that can feel pretty isolating. And maybe or I should speak for myself, maybe there are some things that you are working on as a practicum and you're not really getting any feedback when you are behind a classroom with four walls and most likely the door is shut. Those are the school settings I have been in where there isn't a lot of observation or teams of people coming in. And if they are, it is scheduled. And that creates a whole nother sort of layer of feedback. If I know I'm going to be observed and I am anticipating a certain day and a certain lesson, that's a different experience in a organic, you walk into my classroom and I am pretty much knee deep in a lesson that may or may not be going well. And from my experience, I had more lessons that were tough. I worked in an inner city. I worked in inner city schools with inner city youth. And that presented a whole set of challenges in itself around just sometimes just getting teens and students, because I worked with a middle school population, God bless my soul, to just respect and tune in and be quiet. There were days where it was like, okay, if you could get your students to sit down and be respectful of yourself and others, that was the lesson. That was the win. And a lot of the other curricular stuff comes later, and it comes with trust. It comes with partners that you build in your school community, especially with and outside of the school community with families. So I started to understand that the wins were small and they build in momentum. And then the curriculum really does come after you have those small wins around trust and respect within your classroom with the students.
Mm. And I'm so curious if what's set in place now, system-wise, is the reverse of how the curriculum is pushed so hard that to have that trust and collaboration and union with families or even connection with the adults in the school itself comes second nature because there is so much pressure to complete what you're asked to complete as an educator.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see both sides of the coin very well. Just from my experience teaching in a space where you do have standards. I think standards are necessary in any space you're in because it helps you to reach goals and have benchmarks and to sort of be accountable. And so I understand where standards come in, but I also understand how that can be detrimental to social and emotional well-being and a lot of the other things that I named that come before the curriculum. And so you and I were exposed to a movement, right? And it was around mindfulness in the educator's world. And I think after I embarked on that path through many different resources, There are so many different supports, and I'm sure you can drop some links in for your listeners, Renee. But there are so many different spaces that offer social and emotional support for not only students, but educators as well, because through a trauma informed lens, I think an educator has to understand self perseverance and the perseverance of your team and your students as primary before the curriculum can happen. I think there are many educators and teachers who push through content and curriculum without those other supports and either leave the field really, really early, and we lose a lot of brilliant educators who could have been in the field, or they are just like, I don't ever want to be in the classroom again. Like, I don't ever want to be around this group of students again because of those traumatic moments. I think sometimes we think trauma informed instruction only applies to students, but trauma informed instruction is really to support the adults on the ground in the front line with their students every day.
Mm. I'm sitting with this and how important it is for the adult and for the educator to really pour into themselves and not look outside to bring in support. But ultimately, the support is within them and how they feel in their body in every given moment and how they react or respond to any given situation. Because who knows if there's going to be that support or not? Because from what it sounds like, so many experiences from what I've witnessed myself, what you're sharing yourself, Janae, is that it is in a silo. So when things are getting hard in a classroom environment, regardless of what the environment is, regardless if it's public or private or nonprofit or whatever it may be, there's going to be those hard days with the youth. And if the educator isn't connected with their body and knowing how to self-regulate and be in touch with the emotions flowing through, then how are they going to truly, truly support the youth in front of them and model how to honor these emotions that flood through? Yeah. And Janae, I'm so curious. So when we're looking at everything that you're speaking about now and what you're seeing and noticing of what doesn't really work, what have you witnessed really does work in an environment that you're like, oh, I would love to see this carried through more in other places as well?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the frameworks that do support social and emotional learning put the educator at the facilitator level, and not like this authoritative person who is going to come in and sort of just download information into minds, and those minds have to memorize those pieces of information and then regurgitate them in some way, and then, oh, okay, you have succeeded. um, I think what we are moving into now is authenticity and autonomy, giving choice and voice and options to students that best align with their interests, their capacity, their different neural sort of divergent spiciness that all students have. And it isn't just specialized areas or special education focuses. I think we're moving into an era where all students sort of would benefit from some sort of instructional individualized plan. And then also having a subset of adults that they're meeting with consistently, maybe as some sort of team that really help track and monitor the students' progress based on some of those individualized accommodations that that student needs. I can really see that model starting to flourish in spaces. It's what I'm currently working on in the work that I do now, really helping teenagers and particularly find a college track or a career track that's based on their experiences they're having over the course of 4 years, the adults that they are coming in contact with through mentorship and coaching, and through trial and error, because we are exposing our teens to a variety of different college paths, career paths, vocational paths, trade paths, regardless of their GPAs, regardless of their aptitude, so that students can really have some autonomy over their choice and their track, and it isn't just all based on test scores and numbers and pressure, and because some of our young people, their brains are not even developed fully yet. I think it's been some science that proves that that doesn't happen until the early 20s. And so we really just want to help facilitate experiences that help young people make choices that align to their authenticity.
Oh, I love this. And I'm wondering, with the group of youth you are with now, and also the youth you've been working with over the course of so many years, what do you see are some common strengths that these youth are carrying forward with them? And simultaneously, what are strengths that you see are under the surface, but that have been oppressed over and over and
Mm.
over as they move through the educational system?
That is a good question, Renee. And I think it has a many different layers to approach. But from my lens, just as being a creative person myself, I think creativity is what is missing. And what I mean by that is I had a group of students, eighth graders, and they were reading a novel. And the novel had, a pretty standard curriculum, like read this book and then have a discussion, and then there's maybe a midterm and then a chapter test at the end, and then that's how their grade is determined. I think most curriculums sort of follow that format. I chose to take a project-based learning approach and have those students create a trailer or a movie of what that movie for that book could look like. And there were writing components because I was an English teacher at that time that were embedded into that creative project, because in order to produce something there has to be some writing, some good high quality writing that goes into it. And so I helped to make sure that those standards were there. But then I got to see this group of teens at that time work with an app, work with some other technical literacy pieces that supported this project. And Renee, I was blown away. They were like little producers. They produced some really amazing trailers, so much so that I like put them on YouTube at the time when I was teaching, because they blew me away. I thought it was going to be one of those things in my own practice as a teacher that I'm like, oh, I don't know where this is going. This might be a teachable moment for myself, just sort of giving the students ambitious project. And I wasn't 100% sure about the tech working out, and they nailed it, every single one of them. And I think I took that experience and I embedded it into every learning opportunity that I could. So having some component of a project-based learning sort of project that was a cumulative way to have an assessment, as opposed to like, a paper and pen test. I think those do serve their purpose, but I don't think they serve their purpose every time. And there should be space for creativity, because when we are creative, that we're tapping into a place of our own authenticity. What I create won't be what my partner or my students or you or anyone else creates. That comes from a special place.
Wow, celebrating so big that these youth's creations were uploaded on YouTube for all to see, and the pride they must have felt, the like immense amount of confidence that may have been built, and not even built. I feel all humans come in with confidence, but over time it gets smaller and smaller and smaller due to the way that life and society engages with them. And also, by you offering these opportunities, I can only imagine how that has shifted youth's journey in their life. And also, Janae, when we take you, for example, of you experimenting and playing with this project-based learning, what do you feel separates you from the other educators who don't take that choice, that don't take that action to get curious about project-based learning? What do you feel is yeah, the difference between going that way and then staying in the norm of this is what I'm told to do, period.
Yeah, I think it creates a space in which I'm able to foster those words we just talked about: trust, confidence. I've seen more students pull away from, these really intensive writing assignments that, just sort of have them regurgitating information over and over and over, as opposed to having students, work together, work with their peers, have these really amazing discussions. And these skills are the skills that are going to support them in their career paths, right? Those problem solving skills, those communication skills, those innovative, collaborative skills, as opposed to, I think, just regurgitating memorized facts over and over again. Most of the students in my population uh, were able to write pretty well. And I think we worked on those skills throughout the year, but in a different way. And those skills were embedded into more project based learning, more creative learning, more opportunities to bring in others. So I love to work interdisciplinary, in that interdisciplinary space, meaning bringing other educators, other people into the classroom. I think I learned that in my fellowship, because I worked for an organization where that was really at the heart of what they did, is bringing experts into the classroom, experts in their fields, in the community, people who were retired and had so much wisdom and knowledge, but weren't necessarily classroom teachers and didn't want to be. I think empowering those people also to come in and share space and time in my classroom while students were being creative was a part of something different, something that wasn't taking place in other spaces.
And when we're looking at this creative journey within the classroom, Janae, and whether these volunteers or individuals come in with their own wisdom and expertise, and if that system is available for a school setting, and also, or if an educator is simply working with themselves and there isn't that additional support, why do you feel that educators may not explore the path of project-based learning? What do you feel is like a maybe a missing link between just sticking with what they're being told to compared to maybe getting curious of what it could be like if we tried this instead?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I think it has to be maybe just available as a school initiative. I know for me, in my case, that's what it was. It was something that the administration were wholeheartedly committed to, and they provided personal and professional development and workshop opportunities around project-based learning. So I can see how, if you're not in a district or you don't have an administrative team that isn't pushing and fostering these initiatives forward, it can be sort of like something you take in as a personal commitment as an educator. But I think fundamentally an educator should, right, there's that should word, be on a path to a commitment of always honing their craft and always learning the new media technologies and curriculum technologies. And project-based learning is one of those tools that I think within the last 10 years have really come to the forefront of education reform and education learning. I remember I saw this video about a high school in California, and they were really rooted in project-based learning through technology, and it was a school-wide initiative from grades 9 through 12. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I love to work at that school. And so I think it just comes down to having a team of people that are really committed to that practice. And if you're not in that space, maybe taking smaller steps as an individual to implement components of, project-based learning, 21st century skill embedment implementation and embedment within your curriculum is something you can also do. We talked a little bit earlier about learning some of those social and emotional skill sets that can be embedded within a curriculum, and just reaching out to people like Renee and myself and other educators. I think we all hold such a wealth of knowledge and a tool belt, because this really is a practice. It really is an art, right? And so we have a space to be reflective and creative within the space, as opposed to, robotic and only worrying about standards and results and tests. And there's space for that. And I do think there's a point in time where it plays its part. But I think there's a bigger part, right? Like, I recently was introduced to this 80-20 concept, right? And it sort of plays out in mathematically in the universe, right? I'll just put it out there. And I think within this universe, there's a space in our classrooms where 20% can be around some of those standards that really help hold us accountable and compliant. And then maybe 80% of the space that allows for creativity, collaboration, and reform.
Friend, I just big smile, started to low key tear up. How exciting. First off, how exciting to play with numbers and to have the classroom be a playground of a mini universe within like the greater, and what would this life look like if collectively across the United States, because we're specifically speaking about the US here for ed reform, is what if it did shift to that 2080? And what if that 80% was because the educators explored within themselves like the pure joy of being an artist, whatever that means for them. And Janae, this may have been the first time I've ever heard anybody express teaching as an art, and something flicked within me. It's like a little candle turned on within the center of my body of like, oh, of course, education is an art. Of course. So when looking at education as art, then ultimately the educators are artists. And how do artists get better at their skill set? They practice and they play and they experiment and they get feedback and they allow their emotions to be painted through the paintbrush. And I'm so curious, what aspects of your unique life, Janae, beyond your natural skill sets of, I know that within you, you have this like deep scholarly curiosity of studies and you can go so deep down the rabbit hole. That's a unique talent for you, and not everybody is born with that. So, taking that into consideration, what parts of your lifestyle has cultivated and fostered this artist within you that then transfers into the classroom?
Yeah, I think for me, Renee, it's authenticity, meaning, are we teaching things that we are passionate about? Are we teaching things that we get excited about and we want to share with others? And we can't stop talking about, whether we be in the classroom or on a Zoom with a friend, or, if someone is struggling and having a hard time, we would say, like, hey, by the way, there's this story. And this story has a meaning, and this story has a message, and this story can change your life. And I think um, tying all of those pieces together on bringing art alive through education, there has to be some authenticity behind it. I couldn't imagine, let's say I'll take my favorite artist, Claude Monet, right? I couldn't imagine him like dragging his feet to his easel every day and being like, oh, I really am not in the space where I can deliver one of the greatest paintings that ever graced the Louvre, or wherever his paintings are being hung, right? And so I'm not saying every day has to be, rainbows and sunshine within our practice and within our art. But I think probably 80% of it should be. And I remember when I was teaching Hamlet to my 12th graders, it was probably January, and they were just like, "Hey, lady, give me my C so I can like get out of here and never have to be at the school again." Um, Although I did create a space in which they got excited about it because I was excited about it. And I taught it in a way that I allowed them to like bring it to life through reading, through film, through creative expression. I remember we did an activity where they got to draw a scene from one of the most memorable parts of the play that resonated with them, and they had to like tell us why. And so um, I think just being passionate about what you do and actually liking what you do, I can say I'm one of those unique individuals in the world who actually enjoys Shakespeare. And so teaching it for me was a joy. And a lot of my students would say to me, like, why are you so happy about this? And I'm like, why are you not so happy about this?
Oh, and what a
um,
blessing it is for them to see you in your joy. Like, how many students honestly see their teacher in pure joy throughout
yeah.
the day naturally in the classroom?
I think that could be a feedback reflection question, maybe for administrators to teachers or peer groups to peer groups, however they're being assessed and um, given feedback. Like, is what you're doing actually bringing you joy? Because it translates. It translates across any arena of art, right? I couldn't imagine someone getting up on a stage and belting out this beautiful, melody and harmony and not feeling some kind of joy. And if you're not, you're that connection is made, right? Like the audience are students. I remember when I was in school to be a teacher, and one of my professors said something that always stuck with me. He said about 20% of teaching is being what he dubbed as an edutainer. And I was like, I don't really know if I resonate with that. But then once I got in the seat and I had to get up there in front of that classroom every day and deliver and be well prepared and have a plan and connect, students know when you're prepared and ready and excited, or if you're having those days when you are not. And the results of your lesson and the results of the feedback you get from students in the engagement you get from students is about 80% of what you put into it through your planning and through your passion for the craft.
Mm. That's a mind-blowing statistic to play with. That's mind-blowing feedback of how the students will offer about 80% of what you give in. So if you only prepare 20%, the students are only going to be giving 80% of that 20%. Am I hearing that correct?
Yes, Renee, we're playing around with that ratio we talked about earlier, the 80
We're
20%.
back, Janae.
They live
Wow.
together simultaneously, yes.
So wild. Okay, so when we're looking at educational systems throughout the country, and I have not had the opportunity or privilege or experience to be in the like Central America area, or really it's just been like East Coast, West Coast. But with that being said, when we're looking at other school systems where the school district itself may not be on board with the systems that you've been a part of, Janae, so like really fostering this project-based learning or getting curious about allowing their educators to tap into their own joy or to teach what they desire to teach. I feel like it's like a power type thing of like trying to hold on to the power of like this is what the educators are going to do, period. And in that case, if that is happening places, what do you feel is the first step or something that can be done to shake that up? Or do you feel like it just doesn't even have any potential to be shaken up? It just needs to all be burned down type thing.
Oh, Renee, you hit on a key component to this conversation about reform. I think sometimes when we hear the word reform, it can trigger people, right? It can be like a dirty word or, you're some sort of radical rebel person who's trying to like, stand outside and burn down the school and have a whole campaign around it. And I realized quickly that that approach is not what the phase we're in right now. I don't know if that will ever be a phase that I'm a part of. I think I am always looking for supports within the system, meaning repair and restoration and support and feedback, right? Those are the words that I think of when I am offering a space around reform and innovation, right? We're on the cusp of so many advancements in technology and the ways in which we learn and the ways in which we support each other that incorporate bringing a lot of technology into the teaching space, regardless of the content. I think those are the ways in which we reform. And what I mean by that is I think it's pretty devastating to walk into any classroom now where, projectors aren't working or there are computers from 1995. I think those are the ways in which we can support reform and not necessarily, tearing down the walls and taking a sledgehammer to the walls. If you're not in a space where that is happening, we invest so many ways in which we are finding compatibility in our outside lives, outside of our careers, right? There are dating apps where you're trying to find people you're matched with. There are friend group apps, there are social apps. I think a responsible adult who is in the education world needs to find their school love match or their district love match or their district love community. And that could look like a variety of things. And it might just mean having conversations with other educators, doing your own research, finding out if private, public, charter, Montessori, project-based learning schools are the right love match for you. But there is a community that will support your style of education. And I think it's the responsible thing to begin to look at that, because just like we wouldn't advise anyone to stay in a love match that was not compatible and aligned, I don't think it's healthy to stay in a career, school, district match that isn't aligning with your values as a teacher, as an educator.
Janae, it's beautiful that you're saying this. So last night I was watching Gala Darling's Vortex episode all around friendship. It was about friendship breakup, and I made it through about halfway. I'll watch the rest later. And I'm saying this with this connection to relating to the relation you're in. So if you're not in, this is what I understand from what Gala was speaking, is if you're not in a relationship, or if you're in a relationship with someone and it doesn't feel great, you don't have to burn the whole thing down and make it abrupt. You can allow this to like fluidly go and witness how one person may go one way and the other person may go the other way. And how powerful it is that this is also connected with education and an educator in a system, because instead of burning it all down, one can just like witness what it looks like to go down the path that you're passionate about. And when looking at burning it all down, it was a little bit of a perspective shift. And now I'm witnessing through this conversation, Janae, and what you mentioned a moment ago is how burning it all down can be harmful, which is really funny because just last episode, I mentioned about burning it all down. And I was like, yeah, there's something to it where I feel like it could get to that point, or it may need to be that point. And in relations, burning it all down can be harmful because what that person on the other relationship side has to offer you may not be in like reciprocity with you. It may not feel good, but who's to say it doesn't feel good for someone else? And now I'm wondering within the educational system with different schools, maybe the system that's set in place doesn't feel good for me. And maybe that's like triggering an emotion of burn it all down. We got to get rid of it. But who's to say that setting doesn't support someone else who's different than me? And I wonder, when we look at the grand scheme, when we take a step back and eagle vision youth growing up, and how we see the percentage of like anxiety and depression and emotional challenges happening across the board within adults and specifically even with youth, I do wonder, like, this is kind of a momentum within me, Janae, of like why I feel like it needs to be burned all down to a certain extent, because the quality of the relation within the person itself is at like the lowest of low. There's such disconnect from what I'm witnessing and the stories I'm hearing and such. So that's one perspective that I feel. And also hearing you, Janae, it's like, but what if it doesn't need to be that intense? What if it honestly is doing these micro shifts like an 80/20 for standardized testing and then like passion teaching, or not even passion teaching, but like play teaching or project-based teaching? And what if it's a shift of like, what if we just get new technology and we don't have like the funds for it, but there are so many humans in such abundance that will be able to offer that. So I'm wondering with what I just said, what's moving through you right now?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about phases, right? And I think the phase that we're in now is offering restoration. Maybe it's offering restoration around educator support. I think a lot of educators have this sense of like, okay, you gruel through, the semesters and you get it to the summer and summer is your reward, right? Like, yay, because you made it through this really intense school year and now you get to have a couple of months off and relax and restore yourself. What if we could have a system that was restorative on a regular basis so that by the time you got to summer, it wasn't like your reward and half the summer goes by and you're already dreading the time when you see those back to school commercials come on, you're like, oh, you feel that pit in your stomach. What if I won't say every day, I don't think that's realistic, I think, but what if there were these moments and these checkpoints throughout your practice that were restorative and healing and brought a sense of justice if there were any wrongs done and brought a sense of community when there's isolation. I think that is a phase that we can get to. Because think about it, like in nature, when we go through any sort of purification through let's say burning things down, the next phase is how do we rebuild, right? How do we rebuild when the forest has been burnt down to an ash? We have to be ready for that phase. And I don't know if I have the skills and the tools and the tool set to build a school and a school community from the ash. But what I do have is a set of skills that can provide some supports for the foundations and the great people in the space that we already do have and that we want to retain and keep in longevity.
Mm, absolutely. And so many things just bubbled up with your share. And one is, and this is not the first time this conversation is being had. I've heard it for many, many times over the course of many years of looking at the school year and seeing how the schedule itself can be adapted. And it sounds like what you're referring to is to have these like restorative times for students and also educators throughout the year prior to even arriving to summer. And we know that the school schedule itself is to honor this 9 to 5 job. And we also know that that's not really like it's still present for sure. There's still many people who are in that 9 to 5 category. But we also know that that's not the case as it was before. And we also know that the school system was set up originally mimicking people going to work in the mills or going to work in factories and these bell systems, and everybody eats lunch together and you have these blocks of period of time to learn certain themes or certain topics, and then you go to the next teacher. And I wonder, in your expertise and also in what you've witnessed over the years and experience, where do you feel that schedule could either be shifted, or do you feel that that's actually a support for youth and for educators?
So I went to a school community as in my high school that I still am very supportive of. I'm supportive of their mission and of their space. And growing up in an inner city, um, that space and many spaces like it really are about safety. And so I think if we can provide safe buildings, safe spaces for our teens and children, that would be a priority around reform. So that could look like, to your example, that 9 to 5, right? But maybe between 9 or even earlier, because most schools start a little bit earlier than that. Maybe that window between like 7:30. Some schools start as early as 7:30, if you can believe it. Between 7:30 and 10, it's just, you know, meeting with people, meeting with coaches, meeting with counselors. I think all students can benefit from some sort of counseling and advising teams of adults that work in buildings. And if it wasn't just focused on like you're learning algebra at 7:45 in the morning when your teenage brain isn't ready or capable of handling that amount of information at that time in the morning. I think there's research that supports that. Um, so to your point, Renee, I think there is a space where we can accommodate the needs that families have, especially around in areas that I grew up where safety was a concern, where we don't necessarily want teens at home alone or, getting involved in things that might be dangerous or risky because there's no parental or adult supervision happening. I think there's a space and structure where we can structure the school day and the school time to support the actual brain development of teenagers and children, and also provide safe and supportive spaces with adults.
Yes, 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 yes. What's coming through is that from a person who has experienced so many privileges in life, I never really understood or was behind this safe space setting. I always wanted to like school to start later because why wouldn't we have it start later? And then when I was an AmeriCorps fellow on the West Coast, I remember specifically when wildfires were near and the school principal and district made the choice of like we have to still stay open. It's a safe space for the children. Like this is their space that they go. We have concerns about this, many of the students, if we aren't open. And to take this into consideration when looking at the school day, even up until I'd say like a few months ago, I really was playing with the idea of what if especially for middle school and high schoolers, school started at like 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10, and like really honor that sleeping pattern. But that's with the assumption that every student's space where they're laying their head at night, wherever that may be, and for so many, it's not consistent. What if that isn't a possibility? And what if they're up all night and then in the rising they have to go and like tend to other things, or it isn't a space that's safe. So I really honor and respect the perspective that you're bringing in, Janae, of this reminder that that 7:30 time or that 8 o'clock time may actually be absolutely necessary for so many youth. And we can be intentional, we meaning the system itself, not necessarily I, but like us together, can be intentional about how those first few hours look and not putting youth in a space of like, my nervous system is already off, but now I have to disconnect even further because I am not capable of tuning into what this teacher is saying. And I haven't even had breakfast and I'm running off 3 hours of sleep, X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. I think you also said another word that I am passionate about, and that is wellness, right? And so, wellness and food and nutrition and learning, I think they are a trifecta. I don't think you can separate them. And so, even in intentionality around schedule, I would say there should be some consideration about what children are eating, and if those food choices support the brain activity that is required for their next class. And I mean that when I say that, Renee, I mean I would teach classes after lunch break where children would come up running upstairs into my classroom where they've just had like French toast sticks and syrup and gummy bears and candy and whatever they were having, carbs galore, plates full of carbs. And this is not a dig or a diss at anyone who is sending their children to school with those things. But I think from a teacher's lens and someone who is also passionate about nutrition and wellness is what we're putting in our bodies or sending our children to school with or feeding our children as administrators, as school directors, is that meal going to support the activity that those children have to endure for the rest of the day or in the morning? And I think there are school districts that are doing a really good job in being nutritionally compliant. And I think there are some that can improve. And so when we talk about reform, I think nutrition is on the table.
It's wild and beautifully breathtaking, yet slightly terrifying. How, when we're looking at the educational system, it immediately feeds into all other systems. And when we look at reform of education, it immediately feeds into the reform of all other systems. And this is being said with the groundingness of what is being fed to the minds of society within this country when it is related to nutrition. There's a lot of hype about what's healthy. There's a lot of hype about what's not healthy. It goes in and out, in and out. So even take, for example, the plate. You've seen it, the plate of like 20% this, 40% this, 30% this. Off the top of my mind, I don't
Oh, the
know because I
pyramid, right?
don't follow it.
We're thinking of the pyramid, right? The food pyramid. That's what
Totally.
popped into my mind. Or also it is like a pie diagram sometimes.
Yeah, I think with the younger youth, how I work mostly over my course of career with younger, it does tend to be a plate. But yeah, that pyramid, same, same. And how that pyramid itself is like, from my personal belief, in this moment in time, that pyramid is not supportive of the human body, period. So looking and others may believe differently. Others may believe differently, and that's beautiful. What makes the world go around. And if we're looking for schools to shift something, then there must be a responsibility of taking a stand and doing research on what actually is healthy for the human vessel and what's healthy for the body.
Yeah. I think it's well proven science. And if anyone wants to debate this, I think getting, vegetables and leafy dark greens and antioxidants and polyphenols, meaning any fruit or vegetable that has color in it, I think those things have been proven to support health. And when I have walked into school cafeterias, those are not the things that are being offered. And so to me, that's a disconnect. And that's an area of reform and improvement, and maybe education, right? Like learning together as a school community, learning together as a community of parents and families and people who care about the well-being of children. I think we can care about their minds and maybe their test scores, but do we care about their bellies and their future risk for certain diseases that are linked to poor nutrition? Like, do we care about that too?
And also their capability of receiving information or innovating or being creative. What the mind can't do that if you're hyped up on sugar and then dropping the next. And we know that like carbs ultimately do that. It is sugar in the body and do up and down. And I love carbs. It's all good. Like
Yeah.
I receive carbs more specifically when looking at youth when we're in the school day where we're expecting them to perform at a high point than what is being fed. And funny enough, Janae, when I was in California with the middle schoolers, I was co-facilitating a student committee. And the student committee was asked, and it was an intimate group, probably about like 8 to 11. This committee was asked to elevate aspects of their school that they would like to vocalize to their community to shift. And the number one thing they said was food waste and how they are mandated by the state to get like a milk, a veg, a protein, etc. And how almost 90% of the students don't eat those. Like they just chuck the milk and then they chuck the apple, but it has to go in the trash because of certain protocols set in place that it can't be donated after. They don't have a composting system because it is inner city. And even if it is inner city, like there could still be a composting system available. Like there just needs to be resources and enough interest behind that, I feel, to a certain extent. And I'm saying this because the students and the youth know, like that's their creativity shining through, Janae. They know what they need to do. They know how to approach it. They know how to market it. They know how to speak on behalf of it because it's their passion. It's what's moving through them. But the system overall is oppressing that movement, that creative movement coming through. And this is one of the reasons where I feel that education would benefit in a way from like being shaken up and having a new structure to allow students to have these creative pulses moving through. But then also I see the harm in that. I do. I see that that can just ultimately not be safe for families, for youth, or for educators if there is like an
Mm-hmm.
abrupt shakeup. But that's something else that I'm aware of is how it's such a luxury if someone's in a school that has the benefits and the resources and the privileges to eat healthy food and have these whole grains and whole foods and have a composting system. Like, so excellent, celebrating you. But that's not the norm. And is it even obtainable for the collective?
You said something that really sparked an idea in my mind that I heard someone say the other day around institutions, and education just happens to be the one we're talking about. But I think we're in a phase now in our collective where individuals who are having these types of conversations, who are willing to um, be a part of reform and restoration, are being invited to have seats at the table, meaning in leadership, in legislative situations, in community advocation spaces. All of the people who are having these types of conversations and thoughts around, okay, is it smart to dump food in a trash can that hasn't been touched? Is that what we're really modeling to our youth, or is there another way? And I think there are educators coming on the scene and many other adults and spaces that are coming on into these institutions that have been doing things in a very archaic way, just because that's the way it was. And these things weren't being questioned and there were no alternatives. I think now we're in a space where we're ready to have conversations about, okay, what the alternative is, because I have a seat at the table and maybe someone else has a seat at the table in their community, and we're really ready to start having these conversations.
Absolutely, because we have the resources and the technology and the awareness and the consciousness to be able to hold and shift what is to be. It's not like it was 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago. The reach that is possible through the quick, instantaneous communication from one person to another is absolutely breathtaking. It's beautiful. Friend, is there anything else that's alive within you that you would like to share?
Um, yes, I think a takeaway is to really find your tribe, find your educator, teaching tribe. I know we have all of our tribes outside of the workspace, but to really find those confidants and safe spaces within your community, I think they help to foster these conversations. I know when Renee and I were working together in an organization, we immediately just sort of like had this spark. We started having these sort of conversations. And it was like, oh, yeah, you get it. Oh, yeah, let's keep having that idea or having that space. We actually created spaces around mindfulness for some of the our peers and our students. And so I think find your tribe and always advocate for professional development. A lot of districts have funding for these professional developments for individuals and for groups, and try to find ones that really align to your interests. I know I was able to use professional development funds to attend a training on mindfulness for educators. And when I have that conversation with so many people now post my experience, they have never heard of it. And they always sort of light up around like, oh wow, your organization paid for you to actually go and get certified in mindfulness for educators. Yes, yes, they did. And so I just would pass the torch on to find your tribe, find your passions, find your interest, and advocate for yourself around what it is you need to be the best educator, holistically, meaning you're not dragging yourself to your classroom every day in dread. You're not having those pits in your stomach when that block comes, that block. You're not so much, right? It might not totally ever be eliminated, but you have like the restorative place after. You have that team, you have that person, you have that outlet. So that is a healthy outlet that will enable you to show up the next day restored and refreshed and ready to do this work because this is important work. I think we lose a lot of educators in various capacities who spend a lot of time, money, and resources to take this professional path because it is a professional path. Um, and they sort of get jaded by one experience or the other and say like, oh, I will never do that again. And I think we are losing a lot of talent and brilliance and people who can come to the table and have a space for reform so we can get to the phase where we are ready to build on top of the ashes.
Mm. Janae, summarizing all that's been shared today, what's the main core shift you feel is imperative to take action that will help build the educational system for the future?
Yeah, I think having a space where youth lead um, and having them take ownership in that leadership. And what I mean by that is the young people I work with currently are brilliant. They have amazing ideas, and they know when they have been wronged. They know they have a deep sense of righteousness and what is fair and what is unfair. And I think they are ready to take the stage as leaders to help this reformation and this restoration in their own system. I think they're ready. They always are advocating for themselves, and I think we can either shut them down and give them consequences and disciplinary actions for actually speaking their minds, or we can sort of turn that into our advantage and put them in spaces of leadership. So, for example, I'm currently working with a group of teens to create a youth council within our organization where they're working on projects like supporting the nutrition team, supporting a recycling committee within our building. Because right now, all things just go in the trash, and to me, I think like what? Like what are we doing? So why not take some of our students who are well aware of the environmental crisis we have going on and actually put their leadership skills to work within our buildings around nutrition and recycling. And so that's a council I'm supporting right now with our teams.
I love that's alive for you right now and alive for the youth, and that you're able to pour your life force energy and your interests into supporting them and supporting their voice because their voices themselves, and it's also all the ancestors before them speaking through them as well. And there's such wisdom. There's such wisdom. Janae, for all of the humans tuning in, where can they find you if they desire to stay connected?
Um, well, I am sort of a social media hermit by choice. But I am very active with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and specifically Metro South. And so my contact is through that space right now. And I am a champion for my high school with that is in the Boston area as well. And so I'm also in any of those spaces. So yeah, you can find me if you search for me.
So beautiful. Thank you, Janae, for your time, your wisdom, your ideas, and your joyful presence in the space. And that is a wrap for our conversation. We'll see you next time, honeys.
Thank you, Renee, for having me on.